So welcome to this first YesVU webinar of 2021. Thanks for joining us, and we'll be delighted to introduce our distinguished speaker shortly. That's Angus Robertson. First of all, though, a few words about YesVU. I'm Morag, I'm convener of YesVU. We're a grassroots group. We're campaigning for independence and for Scotland to join the EU as an independent country. We're not aligned to any political party. We started less than a year ago in March 2020, coinciding with the start of the first lockdown as it happens. We now have over 100 members, and they are mostly in Edinburgh and the Lothians, but also across various parts of Scotland and in other countries too. We collaborate actively with other pro-independence groups and pro-EU groups. You've maybe seen us out in action on the streets. That was in the old days before the strict COVID restrictions, but in the latter part of 2020, we were out regularly campaigning on the streets, in particular at the Wednesday lunchtime regular session at the British Colonial Office, otherwise known as the UK Government Hub in the Old Town. That's a symbol of the power grab. We were low in numbers, obviously, but and socially distanced, of course, but I think we made quite an impact on social media, you know, using the images from there. On 31st December, we held a peaceful presence outside Holyrood to mark the end of the Brexit transition period in the spirit of defiance. So our themes were, we didn't vote for this and we will be back. And we got really widespread media coverage, which was fantastic. COVID restrictions are, of course, much more severe, so in the immediate future we'll be focusing on social media campaigning more strongly than ever. So as far as online events are concerned, there's this webinar tonight, and please look out for future webinars in February and March with more of an emphasis on kind of hustings style as we get closer to the Holyrood elections. A bit about YesVU. If you're not yet a member, please consider signing up, and I'll put the link in the chat in a moment. Oh, and there's a website up here, yesvu.scot. Couldn't be easier to remember. So please consider that. Also, our email address is easy to find, and social media. Please, if you use social media, please like, follow us, etc. And there's a hashtag for tonight, which I'll put in the chat as well in a moment, which goes hashtag #EdCentral for EU. So yeah, because social media is so important now, please like and follow and retweet and so on. There will be a recording of this event available afterwards too, so we'll keep you posted about that. So let me just hand over. This event tonight is managed by the rest of the EU team, so Sam, Elise, Leslie, and David, who is going to introduce our speaker. So over to you, David. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Morag. I suspect that for many of you, Angus Robertson is the epitome of a man who needs no introduction. But given that the reach of Yes for EU is beyond long-standing supporters of the indie movement and includes new Scots, EU citizens, and in any case we are reaching out to those who are still contemplating a possible journey from no to yes, we'll introduce him anyway. Angus is a graduate of Aberdeen University, and after starting a career in journalism, including a spell in Europe leaning on his fluent German, was elected to Westminster Parliament for the constituency of Moray in 2001. He became leader of the SNP parliamentary party in 2007 and continued in that role until losing his seat in 2017 to Douglas Ross. At one point in his time at Westminster, he was rated as Scotland's hardest working MP. In 2019, he co-launched the pro-independence think tank Progress Scotland, best known for its active exploration of public opinion in Scotland via opinion polling and focus groups, particularly exploring the views of soft no's, undecided and open-minded voters. His Wikipedia page tells us that he was originally recruited to the SNP by the Proclaimers. Perhaps we will find out the truth about that tonight. He has been selected as the SNP candidate for Edinburgh Central, a key constituency given that it is currently held by Ruth Davidson with a majority of just 610, making it the most marginal Conservative constituency in Scotland, and thus a very real chance of replacing a sitting no MSP with a yes MSP. Angus, a very warm welcome to you. Thank you for taking the time to talk to us this evening. Apologies for the technical difficulties in getting started. Looking forward to hearing your views on the extent to which campaigning for EU membership is a vote winner for the SNP. For the next 15 to 20 minutes, the floor is yours. Need to unmute.
I need to unmute myself. Good evening, everybody. Hope you can hear me loud and clear. I'm absolutely delighted to join you, and thank you to the great many people who are attending online. We are cursed to live in interesting and challenging times, obviously, with the COVID pandemic, and notwithstanding the fact that we are, I haven't Googled it recently to find out how many days, but it's less than 110 days, certainly, until the next Holyrood elections. And so having this virtual meeting, I think, is very apposite. And I particularly warm welcome to anybody who is joining because they haven't been involved before, or they're still trying to learn a little bit more. They're trying to find out a little bit more about why voting in this election is so important, and why in certain seats it's especially important. And I have the honour and responsibility of running for the SNP in Edinburgh Central, as David pointed out, a seat currently held by the Brexit supporting Tory party with a majority of only 610 votes. And for all of us who want to maximise the number of parliamentarians elected who are pro-independence in Europe, and want to make sure that we have less Brexit supporting MSPs in the Scottish Parliament, it makes Edinburgh Central the cockpit, I think, of this particular question in this election campaign. We're fortunate that most constituencies in Scotland are currently represented by pro-European MSPs, pro-independence MSPs, and we have the opportunity in Edinburgh Central, and there are a number of other seats too, where we have the opportunity of making that change in this election. There are a couple of other things about Edinburgh Central that I think are really important for people to have an understanding of if they are not yet. Firstly, Edinburgh was the part of the country that voted by the highest percentage to remain in the European Union. We were almost bang on 3/4 of the vote, and arguably Edinburgh Central, which wasn't accounted for in its own terms during the referendum, it probably was higher than that. So that's point one. It's a very European, very cosmopolitan constituency. Point two, it has a great number of European Union citizens who are resident and are entitled to vote. The latest updated results from the electoral register have just been processed in the last days. Throughout last year, there was an exercise conducted by the electoral registration offices around the country to update the information that we have on voters. And in Edinburgh Central, we have over 5,900 European Union citizens who are resident and are eligible to vote. And in addition to that, in this election, we have a new category of voter able to join EU voters, Commonwealth voters, and domestic residents. We also have international voters, a group of that sort of catches all the rest of the international community that is based here in what I think is a tremendous message to everybody who lives here. It doesn't matter where we're from, we all live here, we all have a stake in the future of this country. And so in addition to the nearly 6,000 European Union citizens who live in Edinburgh Central, we have another 1,200 international voters. They may be American, they may be Norwegian, they may be Brazilian, they may be all kinds of nationalities who have not been so far enfranchised because they come from a Commonwealth country or an EU country. So I think this international cohort, and of course everybody who lives in Edinburgh Central who is European minded, is internationally minded, I think the choice is pretty clear. And in the gentlest possible ways to anybody who's part of this discussion and call who might traditionally vote for another political party, one might be pro-independence, pro-European, and normally vote for the Greens. And a perfectly respectable point of view to have, of course, on the SNP sat with the Greens in the European Parliament, as many of you will know. So there's a great deal of alignment there. Having said that, there are only two major parties who can win Edinburgh Central in the forthcoming Scottish Parliament elections. So it will either be represented by the SNP, myself as the SNP candidate, or it will be the Tories. And that's just the simple political realities on the ground. So if people would normally choose to vote Green, or they would choose to vote Liberal Democrat, or they would choose to vote Labour, and people are perfectly entitled to vote for whoever they want to vote for. I'm just making a point gently here. If we want to make sure that we have a pro-European MSP elected in Edinburgh Central, you're going to have to vote for the SNP in this election. And turnout's going to be very important. And I would encourage all of you who haven't yet done so, please apply for a postal vote. I think it's a really, really important thing that we make it as easy as possible for people to take part in the forthcoming elections. And they are going to be hugely important elections for everybody who lives in Scotland. And frankly, everybody who cares about the future of European cooperation. Why? Because I think by electing a pro-SNP majority, independence majority in the Holyrood elections, that the message will go out loud and clear, elected with a manifesto commitment that the people should be able to determine their own future. The SNP, a political party committed to Scotland being a member state of the European Union. The eyes will be upon us. And those of you who are on social media will know that I spend quite a bit of time sharing European media coverage of what is happening in Scotland. And what is particularly interesting, as somebody who was intimately involved in the run-up to the 2014 independence referendum, was at that time, many people on the European continent didn't really get why independence was a relevant political aim in the 21st century. Weren't we cooperating on a European basis anyway? So what was that all about? And those of you who haven't had a look at the media coverage in recent months will see that there is a total sea change in understanding in the rest of the European continent about why Scotland might want to be independent. We voted to remain in the European Union, having been promised that should we vote no in 2014, that was the best way of guaranteeing our European continuity, a guarantee of us remaining in the European Union. And as we all know, and don't need to be making the point to this particular audience at great length, we have been torn out of the European Union against our democratic wishes. And now our friends across the rest of the EU are very well aware about why Scotland needs to have the full and normal democratic powers to be able to take our place back in the European Union as an independent member state, where all of us who are resident here see our European citizenship rights restored. And that is why this election really, really matters, because I think the reaction across the rest of Europe to a pro-independence, pro-European parliament and government sending out that message that we want to rejoin the European family of nations, I think will be welcomed very warmly by a great many people across the European Union. And notwithstanding the efforts, and we saw some of that this week from George Osborne, of people in the Westminster bubble thinking or imagining it's a good idea to simply say, no, you can't have a democratic choice. I don't really think have thought through what they're saying. Should that occur, of course, I think their problem gets even bigger, because what is a campaign about Scottish sovereignty, independence, and our European and international ambitions, should efforts be made to stand in the way of that, I think that our campaign becomes something wider, broader, and deeper, namely a pro-democracy campaign. And whilst people might think that they can hold things up, they won't be able to do that for very long, because aren't we supposed to be living in the age of global Britain that is aspiring to being seen and respected around the world? Well, if one of the first things it does after Brexit is to thwart democracy in Scotland, then they're in real difficulty. But I think we've already jumped a stage, because we should never, ever, ever take opinion polls for granted. And I may be corrected, I think we're on our 18th poll now, aren't we? 19th poll, something like that, which has shown the growing majority for independence now, sustained for a great length of time. And I thought part of my opening, the opening part of this discussion is perhaps to have a little bit of a look at some of the information that we have about attitudes in Scotland towards the European Union and independence. Many of you will know that I run an organisation called Progress Scotland. And we poll, in particular, people who are undecided or open-minded about Scottish independence, but we ask more generally amongst voters as well. Now, what I'm going to try and do is see if I can share my screen. Well, the host has disabled participants from screen sharing, so I will talk you through some of the numbers which some of you may not be aware of. We asked a series of questions to a sample of 2,000 voters in Scotland on European Union issues. Unsurprisingly, when we asked if people thought the UK government was doing a good job of preparing us for the future out of the European Union, 76% of people in Scotland thought that the UK government was not doing a good job. 73% said that they agreed that Brexit makes Scottish independence more likely, which is a very, very high number, of course. Asking if an independent Scotland should be a full member of the European Union. 67% of people said that Scotland should be a member of the European Union. And if you are really interested in all of the numbers, and these are fully accessible, and if people want to email Progress Scotland, we can send you links to all of this if this really interests you. If you have a look at the subsample information about people's views, one of the things that I find particularly interesting is the very high level of agreement amongst people who vote in particular for the Labour Party and the Liberal Democrats, who agree that an independent Scotland should be a full member of the European Union. If you exclude the don't knows amongst those voting categories, it is a majority. So what some people might view as being a strong point of agreement, obviously amongst SNP voters and amongst Green Party voters, it's also the case that there is a strong body of opinion, majority of those who have an opinion in both the Labour Party and the Liberal Democrats, that should Scotland become independent, then it should be a member state of the European Union. So the work that you do is extremely important at this time in the weeks and the months ahead, because I think we, all of us, need to be reaching out and communicating in particular with three groups, I would suggest. One of those...
I interrupt, Angus. I think I've just upgraded you, so if you did want to share screen, you
Great.
can do it now.
Fantastic. Let's see who can share. Let's do all panelists. Okay, let's see if that works. Right. Oh, here we go. Yep. Desktop share. Great. So are you able to see lots of numbers here now on your screen? Somebody able to nod?
Yes, I can, yes.
Great, okay, fantastic. So you'll be able to see my mouse with a bit of luck moving around. I was trying to draw your attention to these figures here. These are people who voted for the Labour Party and people who voted for the Liberal Democrats in the 2019 general election. And the question, should an independent Scotland be a full member of the European Union, strongly agree and somewhat agree, which are the two positive categories amongst Labour voters, 31% and 21%. Obviously gives you 52, but you'll notice that there is further down, there's also a don't know category, and there's a category of neither agree nor disagree. So even given those options for people to answer, basically saying they're sitting on the fence or they just generally don't know, but effectively still you have a majority response there. Amongst Liberal Democrats, 26% and 21%. Again, if you have a look at those who are sitting on the fence or who don't know, in that case, if you exclude the don't knows, you're again talking about a majority in that category. We could spend a lot of time going through this, and maybe it's something that you want to do at length amongst yourselves, because you could look at what are the levels of response amongst different age groups, geographically, people who voted yes and people who voted no, and a number of other questions relating to income, education, and so on. Country of birth is quite interesting, although I would be a little bit hesitant to take sample sizes as small as 73 respondents. The margin of error with such a small sample is quite broad, but I mean, amongst those 73% of people who were asked the question, 56% of them said they strongly agreed that an independent Scotland should be independent. So even taking a large margin of error into account there, it's still a significant majority. Some of you may not be aware, but the way Progress Scotland polls is that we do double size opinion polls. Normally opinion polls have about 1,000 participants. We do over 2,000, and that means that we're able to isolate a significant group. It's about 20% of respondents who regularly say that they are open-minded or undecided on the independence question. So we're able to interrogate that information as well. And we've already published the data that's shown that Brexit is the biggest single factor that has been moving people from a no to an undecided and then on to a yes position. So Brexit is the biggest single. There are other reasons out there that we are pretty well known and understood. The impact that the UK Prime Minister has on people's thinking, the competence of Scotland's First Minister is also seen as a particularly strong reason for moving people's opinion. But like I said, this is a very detailed research that we've conducted. Happy to share that and for you to chew over, and if you have any further questions, we'll come back to that. I didn't want to monopolize the whole of this evening's proceeding, so I'll just go back to the three groups that I think that we should be looking very closely at trying to communicate with. One, obviously, all of those people who have a very strong desire to protect our place in Europe, to restore our citizenship amongst the domestic community that live here. You guys are out and about. I've seen you at Stockbridge Market. I know you're elsewhere too, doing the campaigning that you do, and that is very important. So we need to keep on doing that. We need to keep on communicating with people who are very strongly pro-European. I think we also need to be reaching out to people who are European Union citizens. Not all of them use their right to vote. There has in the past been a view amongst some who've said, well, I don't know if I'm going to live here forever, so I'm not sure if I should vote in elections. I think it's really important that we communicate with our European neighbours that if this is where they live, this is where they're entitled to vote, and that they should exercise their vote. And the third group, and I don't think we should forget this, is reaching out to people in the rest of Europe. Let us take the opportunity to spread the message that Scotland is preparing to rejoin the European Union. And through the contacts that we have to make that case, I, for years and years, have been doing the best that I can with the continental European media, and also through the professional relationships that I've built up with people across the mainstream political parties, most of them who to start with, had a very restricted understanding of Scottish politics and our European ambitions, and now very much understand them. So I think anything that I can do to work with you, anything that you could do to help me and colleagues in the rest of Scotland who are trying to secure this pro-independence, pro-European majority in the Scottish Parliament, your help would be much appreciated. I know that we're still kind of suffering by the impact of the pandemic. We are very restricted in how we can reach out and communicate directly. We're not leafleting at the moment, we're not canvassing at the moment, but we are able to use social media, and in the weeks ahead, hopefully when restrictions are lifted, we will be getting back to the more traditional campaigning methods. And yeah, any of you who would be happy to help out in Edinburgh Central or in other constituencies elsewhere, no doubt as well, please feel free to get in touch. My web address, www.angusrobertson.org, has a sign up option, and if you would want to sign up and help, regardless of whether you're an SNP member, you'd be extremely welcome. With that, I'll end my introductory comments. Will be delighted to field any questions that you might have.
Thank you very much for that, Angus. Now to our audience, please, we can see you've already started, but please carry on posting questions in the Q&A. You're also welcome to chat amongst yourselves in the chat, but let's keep those two different so there's no confusion. If you want to live tweet, please feel free. Please use the hashtag #EdCentral4EU. Quick question to Angus, just for clarity, given the technical difficulties at the start, are you still okay for an hour from the start? Or
yes, yep.
Fantastic. And right, so let's start with Vivian's question. So Vivian asks, does it worry you that Alison Johnston is going to contest Edinburgh Central and so may easily split the pro-Indy, pro-EU vote, unfortunately? I would also ask you, Angus, to maybe take, as well as dealing with the specifics of that, maybe take a slightly wider view as well across Scotland. Why is it that we're having this profusion of pop-up Indy parties? In general, why are you having to fight against the Greens at all? Surely it's obvious that May is all about getting a yes government. Why isn't there a bit more cooperation and a bit less fighting amongst the movement?
I'm not fighting with anybody. I'm just setting out the stall that we've done it before. We have secured an SNP independence majority in Parliament, and the fact that there were other pro-independence parliamentarians there, I welcome. I'm a Democrat and in favour of a plurality in politics. But you know, politics is about choices. And in Edinburgh Central, Vivian is right to point out the Greens are standing a candidate. It's their right to do so. Also worth pointing out, from memory, I think in the last Scottish Parliament election, they received 4,000 votes and the Tories won by 610. Now, it's not as simple as saying that if those Green voters had all voted SNP, then it would be an SNP held seat, because there are people who vote for the Green Party who are not pro-independence. So it's not quite as simple as that, but I would just gently be making the point to anybody who might be thinking about voting Green with their first vote. The constituency contest, it is a simple two-horse race. There's just no way. These are the facts. And if it really matters to you that you see the replacement of a pro-Brexit MSP with a pro-European MSP who will support a democratic vote in Scotland about our future, you're going to have to vote for myself as the SNP candidate. You know, it's up to the Greens to decide, you know, where they contest, and obviously this is a constituency where they have they do more strongly than they do elsewhere in the country, and I suspect that's their reasoning by wanting to stand. But you know, let's understand the maths in Edinburgh Central. The Tories hold it with 30% of the vote, and the SNP were just pipped at 29%. So every vote matters. So if you are, you know, somebody who might normally vote Green, yeah, of course you can with your second vote. But if you want to make your vote count the most and you live in Edinburgh Central, you're going to have to vote SNP. On the profusion of pop-up parties, I'm not going to seek to have a go at the motivations of people who are wanting to secure an independence majority. I think they're mistaken in thinking that there is a shortcut and playing the electoral system that we have for the Scottish Parliament. If we look back at what happened in 2011 when the SNP won a majority, they did that because they won, in addition to the constituency votes, they won on the list. And it was because of that that we got a referendum. And the danger is, particularly with a profusion of other political parties, none of them in a single opinion poll have been polling enough to get elected. And if what you do is then have slivers of 1%, 2%, 2.5% from the yes side of the political aisle, effectively dropping off the table because they haven't got enough votes to get elected, but they're also not helping actually elect a pro-independence MSP, you run the risk of it backfiring. So the polling is showing there is no sign of any of these pop-up parties being strong enough to contest and win list seats. So you know, we've shown how we can do it before. There isn't a shortcut to getting to where we want to get to. We just need to make sure that we get as many people actually elected, and we know the best way to do that. Leslie had her hand up.
Yeah. There's other people in the questions, but it's just coming back, and quite a few people have put this in the questions as well, is that, and you touched on it, but for Edinburgh Central and other constituencies like it, what do you feel about doing Green as the SNP1 and Green 2? Because people suggest that if everybody votes SNP as a second vote, it's actually less likely to get you're less likely to get SNP MSP. And I know you've just touched on that, but
well, yeah. I mean, I understand why people want to feel that, but I'm just, you know, there's just no way of getting around the facts that when the SNP did elect a majority in 2011 and we had a referendum, it's because we ran a 2-vote strategy. Vote SNP 1, vote SNP 2, you get a majority, you get a referendum. That is what we're aiming for. I noticed in the questioning, somebody said, Angus, please reassure Green voters that their issues will not be ignored, to which I give an absolute commitment on that front. You know, the environment is massively important. And you know, one of the great opportunities we have as an independent country, in a European context, of course, is being hopefully a trailblazer on that front. And there isn't a monopoly of concern and consideration given to the environmental agenda. And I'm extremely committed on that front. So we don't need to reinvent the wheel. We have been able to do it before. If we want to do it again, let's do it in a way that gives us the greatest chance of success. And I think you all care about this as much as I do. So we want to make sure that we're doing the right thing. And there are people can theorize about gaming political systems and electoral systems, but when you speak to the people who are most expert in the field, they will all agree that there is no guarantee of being able to game the electoral system that we have. What we do know is if we get as close to the same number of people who vote SNP on a constituency basis as on the list, the SNP will win list seats, even although they've done tremendously well in the constituency. And we want a legitimate election campaign which minimises the wiggle room for decision makers in Westminster to try and deny us a democratic vote on our future. So I just think we've had a precedent. Let's follow the precedent. Let's do it. Let's get the referendum and win.
That's great. Thank you very much, Angus. Shall I carry on with another couple of
questions? Please do, Elise. Yeah, thank you.
So there's a few questions relating to EU nationals specifically. So I'll just ask these for just now. From Susie, in an independent Scotland, how will the immigration policies protect EU nationals, especially those who have lived in Scotland for a long time and have little contact with their birth country in particular, as well as whose birth countries don't allow dual nationality. And relating to that, there's a question towards the end from a number. The Home Office is taking its time to answer the Europeans who have sent all their documents about their citizenship. What can you do about it?
Okay. So on the first point on EU nationals, in the 2014 independence referendum, the Scottish Government published a very detailed white paper on the approach that the SNP in government of an independent Scotland would pursue on the question of residency and nationality. And I think by any objective reading of that, it was extremely welcoming of everybody who is here and wishing to maintain and continue at that stage the freedom of movement, which many of us think is a tremendous loss with Brexit. I am not involved, and I'm not aware that a white paper draft is being drafted at this present time for the next referendum. But when it comes, I'm absolutely certain that the same values that were reflected in the 2014 white paper will be continued in the next. Scotland's not full. Our problem has not been immigration historically, it has been emigration, and the contribution of people who have come from elsewhere, mostly from Europe, of course, in terms of numbers, is immense. Were it for that fact, I wouldn't be here, just as a kind of statement of, I mean, I know I have a particularly Scottish name, but my first language is German, and my mother came here as a refugee. So, you know, these things matter a lot to me. I totally get it. On the Home Office citizenship front, obviously I would be delighted to be a national voice, to have a national elected office voice on this issue, and would be lending my support to people in general, but specifically if people are local residents and would need the help of their MSP on citizenship questions, I would be there for them. I know the current incumbent MSP for Edinburgh Central has been distinguished by her absence from holding open surgeries for people in Edinburgh Central. I would be holding regular surgeries and will be happy to help people in citizenship questions, and incidentally work for anybody regardless of their political views.
That's great. Thank you very much. That's reassuring, I think, for our listeners.
That's great to hear. Question from Kenny Gilchrist. Should you not also be selling the message across the world, not just in the EU? Yeah. And as well as that literal question, Angus, perhaps you could tackle it slightly more broadly in terms of how we gain international acceptance for an independent Scottish state. Yeah.
Well, please don't assume because I was saying that there has been a growth in understanding about Scotland's situation in Europe that there hasn't been elsewhere. There is. And it's not just newspaper articles that appear in European Union countries where there is that interest. You can look at the Spanish language press or Portuguese language press in South America. You can look at Southeast Asian titles. Scotland is a story. It really is a story. And it's an understandable story. And there is a lot of goodwill towards us. And that's why it doesn't matter who your contacts are in different places, just keep on reaching out. We all have a role to play in explaining why it is that we want to exercise our democratic choice, and we would like to rejoin the international family of nations. And it is not just a European question, although we want to join the European Union. I want Scotland to be in the United Nations. I want us to be a full part of the international community and play our part in, going back to the earlier question that I was answering about the environment, on climate questions, on security issues. We need to cooperate with our neighbours. We haven't got onto it. I don't know if anybody's got any questions about this. I have for years had a very strong drive for us as a Northern European country to improve the relations that we have with our immediate neighbours. all of them. And you know, to the north of us, we have Iceland. To the east of us, we have the Scandinavian nations in Norway, in Sweden, in Denmark. Don't forget our friends in Ireland, and I'll never forget our friends in the rest of these islands. But I think there is a shared interest in this corner, backyard of ours, in a European and an international context. And Scotland had, over centuries, very, very close links with our Northern European neighbours. And I would wish us to explore that again, and for all kinds of reasons. It needn't all be about the economy. It needn't all be about security. It can be about important things like cultural cooperation. And why not? And given we are blessed to have the natural resources that we do, nations like Scotland and Iceland in particular, you know, we are going to be net energy exporters, given the renewables that we have, and technology will allow us to export that to the European continent. So we have reason to want to cooperate fully with our neighbours on a whole range of things. And that's one of the things that I'm so excited about the prospects of Scottish independence, is that we will become an internationalist and internationalizing country, because by becoming a sovereign state, that is literally what you do. And we will have the proper diplomatic presence of countries from around the world, and we will be represented around the world in our own right too. And I think that's hugely exciting. And I think it should be really exciting for younger people in Scotland. They will have their citizenship rights restored. They'll be able to live, work, love wherever they want in Europe. That's a hugely exciting thing. But there's also the prospect of jobs based here, as well as elsewhere in Europe, because of our sovereign status. And so whether you're a policymaker or an ideas person, you're interested in diplomacy, you're interested in public service, as we become a full sovereign state, the opportunities for all, but obviously for younger generations in particular, as this becomes the new normal, the new reality, I think are great. So I find hugely encouraging and exciting.
That's great. Thank you very much for that. Right, next question is topical. We've got a question about fish from Keith Thompson. Can we reassure fishermen that joining the EU will be better than the UK position? Less catches, but sales market back.
Well, I think there's a lot of people in fishing communities who are probably deeply regretting having fallen for the sea of opportunities fiction that was sold to them, and why many of them voted for Brexit. The irony that in many of our coastal communities, there's more people who are involved in fish processing than in the offshore sector, who are now not able to get the fish. Well, firstly, they're not able to get the staff to work in the processing plants, because a great many of them were from other European Union countries, and are now not able to get their fish into market, the biggest, most important market of which is the European market. I think, I don't know how many of you heard Jimmy Buchan on the radio the other morning being asked by Nick Robinson if he regretted having been such an active proponent of a Brexit vote, and literally said, "I'm not here to answer that question," because he couldn't answer it. I feel desperately sorry for people who whose livelihoods have been endangered in the way that they have. And you know, Kenny's right in this question. We have to explain why Scotland being part of the single European market is so important for the fish that is caught to be able to sell it. And we have to explain why a Scottish government will have fishing as a key priority in a European context, and that has to be better than the disastrous situation that we've got at the moment. They were sold a pup, and not for the first time.
Yeah.
It's very clear, Angus. Thank you. So at this point, I'm going to go slightly off piste, as they say, and ask a question that the audience hasn't put.
Yes.
Moderator's rights. The real damage of Brexit, actually still isn't fully known yet. It's unfolding at like a slow-moving train wreck in front of our living experience. The financial services industry is pretty critical to life and prosperity here in Edinburgh. What are your feelings about the lack of an agreement with the EU over services and the impact on life here in Edinburgh?
Yeah. So you described what's happening at the moment as a slow-moving train wreck, and that's right. And sometimes in those circumstances, changes are imperceptible. One doesn't really notice some of the changes that are happening, and this is, of course, masked by the COVID reality that we're living in, which takes understandable precedence over everything else. So there's not a lot of bandwidth for people across the whole range of the challenges that Brexit has presented, and one of those is what's going on with financial services, but services more generally, because services are the largest single part of our trading relationship. And we won't know the damage of that for a while. And some people will never have a sense of the lost opportunity that there has been. It's not just about what we are losing that we already have. It's about not gaining the things that we would have were we to have remained in the context that we were within the single European market, and so on. So that's where it behoves those of us who are very interested in these challenges, that we communicate them effectively, because otherwise we do run a risk that it's less of a slow motion train wreck, but it's the syndrome of the frog being boiled that doesn't really notice the change in the temperature until it's too late. And that's why we should never tire of pointing out what is happening with things. One thing I do know for certain is that when speaking to people who work in the financial services sector, that their difference in perceptions now compared to 2014 is significant. I'm not saying they're all converted and they voted no in 2014 and they would now vote yes. Not all of them. Great many of them are more open-minded than they were before, and understand why being able to be in a European Union country, 4.5 hours on a train ride from London, where you could hold a Scottish and a UK passport, you can have both. There are a whole series of things that I don't think we were able to fully communicate last time round that we will this time round, and people will realise that Edinburgh has a great, and incidentally other parts of Scotland, because of financial services elsewhere in the country, have a much better prospect in the future of a country that's within the European Union that trades tremendously with the rest of the nations on these islands as well. So in a way, we're in a perfect position to be a bridge to elsewhere. And I would hope in time, and I know I'm going off piece now, I think if there's going to be a way for people in England to move back to a European orbit, I think it's going to be because they are going to see that Scotland to the north and Ireland to the west within a European Union context are showing that over time, because we would be becoming ever more and more successful, that is what they should be doing as well. It is by looking and saying, well, hold on, these guys did it, so if they can do it, why can't we do it?
Okay, I think it's my turn. I was going to ask the question from Nella. You touched in your presentation, you touched on the fact that we need to reach out to the EU, to EU countries, and communicate with them about the Scotland independence. And Nella is saying that many people in the EU do not understand the Scottish question, the Scottish desire for independence. What can we do to remediate that?
Yeah. Well, this is where we all have our own different ways in and where we can play a role. For some of us, it will be because we have friends who live elsewhere. For some of us, it'll be because we have contacts. For some of us, it's because, I mean, for example, I'm regularly invited to do things on European media outlets. I've just been asked if I would do a seminar for the Friedrich Ebert Stiftung. Some of you might know that. That's the German Social Democrats think tank. I've been invited to go and speak to the SPD in Germany. And the idea that the German equivalent of the Labour Party would be inviting somebody from the SNP to speak at their meetings 10 years ago would have been unimaginable. Now they realise, you know, hell, we're the good guys. We're the ones who are standing up for European values and standing up to the extreme Brexit of Boris Johnson. So what I would say is all of us have a role to play, and you know, it can be as simple as a vote, using your vote in the forthcoming elections, of campaigning, as many of you do, to persuade people who are not quite there yet, of making sure that people who think like us, that they do turn up, and maximizing the vote is going to be very important. So we've all got a different role to play, and it can be as simple as when you see something on social media that is making the positive case. Nella, I don't know where you're from, judging by your name, but you will see, where's Nella from? Help me out
Nella
here.
is from Germany originally.
It's from Germany, yeah. Okay, well, there we go. Retweet everything. I mean, last week was amazing. I don't know if you picked up the Deutsche Presseagentur, the German press agency, wrote a story. I had been a part of that story, and it then, you know, it got covered by absolutely everybody, from the Berliner Tageszeitung, Der Spiegel, Stern, you know, and rather than just let that happen, last week I spent a morning and I just retweeted every single German newspaper that was running stories about Scotland. That helped other people in Germany see this newspaper coverage, but it also let people here see, hold on a second, look at the number of publications, in this case in Germany. A few weeks earlier, the First Minister had given a newspaper interview to you know, Le Figaro in Paris, La Repubblica in Italy, and a number of other Frankfurt Allgemeine Zeitung and so on. And you know, the coverage was amazing. So for those of you who haven't into another language, you know, spread the good news, and don't imagine necessarily that everybody has seen everything, because we don't. I don't read the French media very much, or the Portuguese. I don't have, my school French isn't good enough for it. But you know, some of you will have an extreme focus on one country or another country. So if you see stuff, post it, share it, and you know, that's a good way of pointing out. You know, I've yet to find from a mainstream newspaper coverage of what's happening in Scotland in a way that's really out of kilter, in a way that was the case in 2014. Of course, some publications don't quite get the nuances of one thing or another, but I just, shining through most of the coverage that I've seen is a sense of understanding that there is this democratic deficit here that we've got, and that we are the pro-Europeans.
Yeah, that's great.
Right.
Yeah, there's certainly a lot more awareness. And I would say, if you haven't done so already, one thing you can do is join Yes for EU after tonight, maybe.
There you go.
David.
Yeah, thank you, Angus. And just to mention, you talked about much of the media coverage in recent weeks, and Morag mentioned a small socially distanced demonstration, Yes for EU, held outside the Parliament on the 31st of December. And in fact, pictures from that have been used since to illustrate stories in newspapers as far apart as the South China Daily and the Winnipeg Sun, and many papers in between. So we're doing what we can, getting out there despite the COVID restriction, albeit in a socially distanced way. Now, we've had a couple of questions from John Sharp and David Maxwell. I'm going to pick John Sharp's because they're both very similar. If independents' campaigning position was softened from 100% commitment to apply for full EU membership to something like Norwegian position initially, plus a possibly advisory referendum on joining terms, one, would this lose significant support from pro-EU people? Two, would it gain any support from people who are pro-Indy but EU skeptic?
Okay, well, hello, John, and if that's the John Sharp in Elgin, who I think it might be, I send greetings to my erstwhile constituent in Murrayshire. I think that given the numbers that I was sharing earlier, John, that showed 67% of people believing that Scotland should be a member of the European Union, I think shows that there's not really a need nor a demand to triangulate the proposition of, you know, where should Scotland be. I think it's important for us to be unequivocal to our friends in Europe so that they know that we are pro-European, we wish to be in the European Union, and that is what we're about. And so when it comes to it, they will be as helpful and supportive towards our ambitions as I know that they will be. Yeah, if it's the case after independence that there are people or political parties who want to make the case for different forms of international cooperation, that's absolutely fine with me. But I think given the level of public support, if Scotland should be independent, should it be in the EU? Yeah, it's massive. So there's no need to politically make a decision. I think you actually run the risk if you were to say, well, do you know what? We're not going to maintain our commitment to the European Union. We're going to do something else or delay it. I think you run the risk of losing people, perhaps many of the people who are on this discussion, who wouldn't want to see the commitment to Europe diminished. They would, of course, they would want Scotland to be a member state of the European Union. And so we don't want to lose people along the way. But, you know, I think we should get there first. And then if people want to change our arrangements, then we live in a democracy. So people should be able to choose whatever it is that they want.
Okay. Thank you. Over to Elise. You need to unmute, Elise.
Sorry. There's so many questions, Angus. Where do I start?
Dave, sorry,
yeah.
Can I say Dave Russell?
Yeah.
I think it's Dave Russell in the chat has been saying that he had a question, and I think it was actually kind of similar to a question I had. So I can read his and then ask mine at the same time if I can find his original.
I know, reading through the...
I was trying to find them all. Sorry. I think his question was about whether you would need a referendum for the EU after we've had a Scottish independence referendum. Would there be another referendum needed? I think that was his question.
Yeah, I think
referendum post-independence and recession to the EU. And my question was kind of similar, but about people who are very pro-independence but are skeptical about EU, which there is, you know, we've come across quite a few people in that camp. So what, yeah, just can you comment on those two aspects?
Well, I think if we win the Scottish Parliament elections on a manifesto commitment to negotiate Scotland's membership of the European Union, I think we have a mandate to do that. So, you know, I think if the people have said that that's what they want, then, you know, let's do it. So that kind of answers that. You know, yes, there are people who like the idea of Scotland being independent and not a member state of the European Union, and you know, okay, but that's not what is on offer at the moment. What is on offer is Scotland becoming an independent state that is in the European Union, that is in the United Nations, and is working on defence and security cooperation with our neighbours. That is what's on offer. If people, people then have a choice of whether they would rather stick with a United Kingdom where we're governed by people we don't elect, and we'll just leave it up to them, whether their decisions are good, bad, or indifferent. I happen to think that most people, even if they would prefer an independent Scotland to be governed in slightly different ways, or international cooperation being in a slightly different, I think they would still prefer Scotland to be independent. I think most reasonable people, because then we would have the power to change it if we wanted to. Do I think that they would prefer to be governed by Boris Johnson as opposed to an independent Scotland being in the EU, being in the United Nations, and cooperating in other ways with other countries? I don't really think so. There will always be some, of course there will. But we're trying to build a case that has maximum support in Scotland, and as I've already pointed out, the mainstream position, 67% of people think an independent Scotland should be in the European Union. That's a very, very strong position for us to be representing.
Thank you.
Indeed, quite right. Okay, well, look, we've used the hour, so I think we should move to a final question. And after Angus dealt with this, perhaps Morag would close the session for us. So this question is from actually one of our members, Sandy Carmichael. If given the opportunity, Angus, what would you say to Joe Biden if he asked you to sell him on the concept of an independent Scotland?
Well, the first thing I'd say was congratulations. And he's done, I think, the people of the United States and the rest of the world a tremendous service. As I don't know how many of you have seen the clip where Joe Biden is shouted at by a journalist. Do you have a word for the BBC? And he looked over with a twinkle in his eyes and said, "I'm Irish." Mm-hmm. And I think Joe Biden is a moderate Democrat, small d, large d, and I think he will be well advised. For some of you who don't know this, one of the first hires by his administration on transatlantic and European relations is somebody who graduated in Edinburgh in the early noughties, called Amanda Sloat. She wrote her doctoral thesis on Scotland's relationship with Europe. So I think President Biden is going to be well advised by his own colleagues. And should I meet him, I'm sure he would have read the briefing note that would have been prepared for him. I think most countries, unlike the last time round, will not become active participants in trying to make the case against Scottish independence. And we know the UK worked very, very hard to get leaders from around the world to say things that gave the appearance that they wouldn't be tremendously pleased about Scotland being independent. Americans of all political persuasions, I think, naturally understand why countries want to govern themselves. It's only 250 years ago that people were telling the Americans that they were too wee, too poor, and too stupid to govern themselves. And they decided, they thought they would get on with it themselves. I do, however, think that our friends in North America, so both in the United States and Canada, will want to know that a Scotland will be a good and trusted partner bilaterally, but also multilaterally, that we will be involved in the European Union, that we will be involved in NATO, and that we can work together on the issues that we share. We won't agree on everything. Scotland will not want to be home to nuclear weapons, but in that we share the same position as the Norwegians and the Danes. And the United States has good relations with both of those countries. So I don't think, in private, I don't think any American politician would find it tremendously difficult to understand why Scotland would want to be independent. And who knows, if we get our skates on and we get our referendum done and dusted, we could have President Biden at our Independence Day celebrations. That would be quite nice, wouldn't it?
Fantastic, Angus. Thank you for that. I'm going to ask Morag to unmute herself and come back in to close the session for us.
Yeah, thanks ever so much. That was really good, really interesting. Thanks everyone for putting in the questions. There've been, you know, so many really good questions. It's been really quite difficult to, you know, to choose which ones to ask. And hopefully we covered all the, you know, the main areas of concern. But sorry if your question wasn't asked. Also, sorry again about the delay at the start. So thanks for your patience. If you've enjoyed this one, our next webinars will be in February and March, and best way to find out will be to, well, follow us, like us, follow us on social media, but also consider joining us. I put in the details again in the chat a moment ago. So finally, thanks ever so much to Angus. We really appreciate it. It's been ever so interesting, and we can't thank you enough.
Thank you for having me. Thank you for having me.
Hope you come
very
back.
much.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks for joining.
Bye-bye. Bye, everybody. Remember to vote. Remember to vote.
Yeah.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye now.
Bye-bye.